"Stick to your mop, old man." The laughter of the interns echoed through the lobby as David quietly continued to clean the marble floor. The scent of disinfectant filled the air, and the polished tiles reflected their mocking faces. David didn't respond, he just smiled faintly and kept working. He had simply suggested a way to reduce waste in the company's production line, a small idea that could have saved thousands, but to them, he was just a janitor. No one cared what he had to say. Only the CEO had paused briefly, giving him a curious look before walking away, too busy to think twice. The room slowly emptied, leaving only the faint hum of the vacuum and David's silent thoughts. He looked around at the company he once dreamed of working for, not as a janitor, but as a man who could make a difference. Irony had a cruel way of showing up in his life. Later that evening, David walked home through the cold streets, his worn shoes splashing through puddles. The rain fell softly, and his jacket, patched and faded, did little to keep him warm. He clutched a small bag of groceries tightly, counting every coin in his mind. Rent was due in 2 days, and he wasn't sure how he'd manage it. Still, as he reached the door of their tiny apartment, the sound of a little girl's laughter greeted him. Emily ran into his arms, wrapping him in a hug that melted all his worries away. "You're home, Daddy," she said, her voice full of joy. He smiled, the fatigue in his eyes fading as he held her close. Inside, their home was small but warm, filled with drawings Emily had made of the two of them. Her favorite one showed him in a suit, standing in front of a tall building with the words, "Dad's Company," written above it. As they sat together under the flickering bulb, David helped her with her homework, explaining math problems and correcting her handwriting. She watched him with admiration, unaware of how hard he was fighting to give her a better life. When she noticed his calloused hands and tired eyes, she paused for a moment and said softly, "Someday, people will listen to you, Dad." He looked at her, a little surprised by her words, and smiled. "Maybe they will," he said, though his voice carried both hope and sadness. She didn't know that her father once owned a small but growing business, that he had built it with passion and honesty, and that he had to sell it all when her mother got sick. He had spent everything, his savings, his home, his dreams, just to keep her alive for one more year. After her mother passed away, David never went back to business. The loss broke something in him, and all that mattered then was raising Emily. He took whatever job he could find, and when he got this janitor position at the very same company that once admired his ideas, it felt like life's strange way of testing him. Every day, he arrived before sunrise and left long after sunset, never complaining, never asking for more. He watched others chase success, knowing what it cost to truly earn it. When people mocked him, he stayed silent. He had nothing to prove to anyone, except to his daughter, who looked at him like he was the strongest man in the world. That night, after Emily had fallen asleep, David sat by the window, listening to the rain tapping against the glass. He looked at the city lights in the distance and thought about the path his life had taken. He missed his wife. He missed the feeling of being respected. But as he glanced at Emily's sleeping face, her little hand clutching the edge of his old work shirt, he felt something deeper than pride, peace. He knew he had made the right choices, even if the world couldn't see it. He whispered to himself, maybe one day, they'll understand. And with that, he closed his eyes, ready to face another day where he would be laughed at for being just a janitor, but deep inside, he knew, he was far more than that. A week later, the entire company was in chaos. Reports flooded in showing massive losses caused by inefficiency and poor planning. Managers shouted across the boardroom, papers scattered everywhere, and no one seemed to have an answer. The CEO sat silently at the end of the long glass table, frustration clear on his face. "We should have listened," he muttered. Everyone fell quiet when the door opened. David walked in, still wearing his janitor's uniform, holding a small folder in his hands. Behind him, the CEO stood tall and calm, looking at his stunned employees. "This man warned us," the CEO said firmly, his voice cutting through the tension. He gave us the solution days ago, but no one cared to listen. The room went completely silent. David slowly placed his folder on the table and spoke softly, explaining how his simple suggestion could fix the entire problem: recycling excess materials, improving workflow, and reducing waste. It was practical, cost-effective, and exactly what they needed. As he spoke, even the highest-ranking executives leaned in, realizing how foolish they had been to ignore him. When he finished, the CEO looked around the table. "His plan just saved us millions," he said. The same interns who had laughed at David days earlier now stared at the floor, their faces red with shame. One of them whispered, "I'm sorry, sir," but David only nodded kindly. "No need," he replied. "We all learn at our own pace." Then he turned toward the window, sunlight catching the wrinkles on his tired face, and said quietly, "Sometimes, wisdom wears a janitor's uniform." Those words stayed in the air long after he left the room. The CEO watched him go, realizing that the most valuable person in the building wasn't sitting in a suit, but walking out with a mop. Later that evening, the CEO found David in the hallway, refilling his cleaning bucket as usual. "You could have told me," the CEO said softly. "You could have told anyone who you were." David looked up, his eyes calm but full of memories. "I didn't think it mattered," he said. "Titles don't raise children. Love does." The CEO was speechless. He had spent his life chasing power, success, and recognition, but in that moment, he saw something he had lost long ago: humility. "You're a remarkable man, David," he said sincerely. David smiled and simply replied, "I'm just a father trying to do right by his daughter." That night, David returned home carrying a small envelope the CEO had given him, a promotion offer and a generous bonus. But when he stepped into the apartment and saw Emily running toward him, he realized the real reward was already in his arms. "You're home early," she said with a grin. He lifted her up, spinning her around as she giggled. The light from the street lamp filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow on the two of them. Emily looked up at him curiously. "Why are you smiling so much, Daddy?" He kissed her forehead and said, "Because today, people finally listened." She didn't quite understand, but she smiled anyway, resting her head on his shoulder. As the night grew quiet, David sat beside her as she drifted to sleep. The envelope lay unopened on the table. He didn't need to look at it, he already knew its contents. What mattered to him wasn't money or position, it was the look in his daughter's eyes when she said she was proud of him. For years, he had felt invisible, walking through hallways where people barely noticed him. But now, he had earned something greater than status. He had earned respect. He glanced once more at Emily, her small hand clutching his sleeve, and whispered, "We're going to be okay." Outside, the city lights shimmered like distant stars, and for the first time in a long while, David felt rich again, not in wealth, but in dignity, peace, and love.